Imagine an event so devastating that it forever changed the course of humanity. A flood that spared almost nothing and no one. Noah, following divine command, built an ark to save creation, but not all beings were granted this privilege. Have you ever wondered why certain creatures were not allowed on the ark? Who were these beings, and what is the meaning behind their exclusion? Today, we will delve into ancient mysteries and reveal the creatures that God chose not to save. Get ready to uncover truths you never imagined. Introduction to the Flood and Noah's Ark. The account of the flood and the construction of Noah's Ark is one of the most iconic episodes in the Bible, found in the book of Genesis, chapters 6 through 9. This event is described as a divine response to the extreme corruption that had overtaken humanity. In the times before the flood, wickedness had spread across the earth so intensely that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 6:5. God then decided to bring a great flood upon the earth to purify the world and restart creation. Noah, described as a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, Genesis 6:9, was chosen by God to be the instrument of life's preservation. He was commanded to build an ark, a colossal vessel, according to divine specification. The ark was not only a means of survival for Noah and his family, but also a refuge to preserve the animal species that inhabited the earth. The construction of the ark took years, a long and challenging process in which Noah demonstrated his unwavering faith and obedience to God, despite the scorn and disbelief of his contemporaries. This introduction sets the stage for understanding not only the animals that were saved, but also those that, for reasons we will explore, were not destined to enter the ark and consequently perished in the flood. The animals that entered the ark. A divine selection. The selection of the animals that entered the ark was a central aspect of God's plan to preserve life on earth after the flood. In Genesis 6:19-20, God instructs Noah to bring into the ark two of every kind, a male and female of each species, both clean and unclean, thus ensuring the continuity of diverse forms of life. This selection was not random. Each chosen creature had a crucial role in repopulating the planet once the floodwaters receded. The animals that entered the ark are often interpreted as representatives of the entire terrestrial creation. God not only preserved humanity through Noah and his family, but also ensured that the diversity of animal life was maintained. In addition to the pairs, there is a specific mention in Genesis 7:2-3 of 7 pairs of clean animals, intended for sacrifices, and also of birds, which are mentioned in greater numbers, so that their species could multiply on earth. The choice of animals can be seen as a representation of the divine order in creation, where each species had a specific place and purpose in God's plan. This preservation symbolizes the continuity of life, the renewal of creation after judgment, and the promise that the earth would be inhabited again, this time with a renewed humanity and a new covenant between God and man. The ark therefore functioned as a microcosm of God's original creation, where all creatures, great and small, were gathered and protected. The survival of each species depended on Noah's obedience and divine providence, which ensured that life, in all its diversity, would continue even after a catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions. This narrative reflects God's concern for all creation, not just humanity, reinforcing the idea that God is sovereign over all life, and that his plan for salvation and preservation extends to all living beings that inhabit the earth. Creatures that did not enter the ark, myths and interpretations. The biblical account of the flood and Noah's ark primarily focuses on the salvation of Noah, his family, and the animals chosen to repopulate the earth. However, the absence of mention of other creatures and beings raises questions that, over the centuries, have been the subject of various interpretations, myths, and apocryphal traditions. While the Bible does not explicitly specify all the creatures that perished in the flood, diverse religious and cultural traditions suggest that certain beings, possibly of a mythological or spiritual nature, were not meant to survive. In some apocryphal traditions, such as the Book of Enoch, beings known as the Nephilim are mentioned, giants born from the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. Genesis 6:1-4. These beings, described as powerful and of great stature, are often interpreted as some of the creatures not allowed on the ark. According to these traditions, the Nephilim were a corrupt and violent race, whose existence was an affront to divine order. The flood was therefore also a means of eradicating these beings from the planet, eliminating the corruption they represented. Besides the Nephilim, other apocryphal texts and ancient mythologies mention hybrid creatures, part human, part animal, or even fallen spiritual beings that inhabited the earth before the flood. Some scholars suggest that these creatures, which might include beings like centaurs or those with demonic characteristics, were not preserved on the ark because they represented a violation of the natural order established by God. These beings, born of transgressions, were viewed as part of the corruption that God intended to purge with the flood. It is also important to note that, in some Jewish and Christian traditions, the flood is believed to have been an event that purified not only the physical world, but also the spiritual world. This would imply that certain beings, especially those of a demonic or spiritual nature, could not be saved by the ark because they were not part of God's divine plan for the preservation of earthly life. The destruction of these creatures symbolizes the restoration of divine order and the elimination of forces that were contrary to God's will. These interpretations offer a broader perspective on the flood narrative, suggesting that not only corrupt humans were judged, but also beings that existed outside the order created by God. The absence of direct mention of these creatures in the canonical Bible leaves room for speculation, but it also reinforces the idea that the flood was a total purification event, removing from the earth all forms of life that were not in accordance with divine will. The Nephilim giants, beings excluded from the plan of salvation. The Nephilim are among the most enigmatic and debated figures in biblical scripture, briefly mentioned in Genesis 6:4. Described as giants or heroes of renown who existed on earth in those days, their origin is attributed to the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. This brief reference has sparked countless interpretations over the centuries, with many ancient Jewish and Christian traditions expanding on the story of these beings as a race of corrupted giants whose existence was closely tied to the increasing wickedness on earth before the flood. The sons of God are generally understood to be fallen angelic beings who disobeyed God by intermingling with human women, resulting in the creation of the Nephilim. These giants were not only physically imposing, but also deeply corrupt, playing a significant role in the moral degradation of humanity. Their presence on earth was seen as one of the contributing factors to the total corruption that led God to decree the flood as an act of judgment. The Nephilim, by their very nature and origin, were excluded from the plan of salvation that God established through Noah. Unlike the animals in Noah's family who were chosen to enter the ark and survive, the Nephilim symbolized a severe deviation from the divine order. They represented the attempt by malevolent spiritual forces to corrupt God's creation, resulting in beings that were outside of God's original plan for humanity and nature. The exclusion of the Nephilim from the ark reflects God's desire to restore the purity and original order of creation, eliminating any element that was contrary to His will. Furthermore, some apocryphal traditions and intertestamental literature, such as the Book of Enoch, expand on the story of the Nephilim, detailing their malevolent influence over humanity and their abominable practices. These texts suggest that the Nephilim and their fathers, the fallen angels, taught humans forbidden knowledge, such as warfare, magic, and other practices that intensified the corruption on earth. In this context, the flood not only destroyed the Nephilim physically, but also served as an act of judgment against these rebellious angelic beings, who were then imprisoned in spiritual confines until the final judgment. The story of the Nephilim serves as a warning about the dangers of straying from God's plan and engaging with malevolent spiritual forces. Their exclusion from the ark and subsequent destruction in the flood symbolized the inevitable fate of all who opposed the divine order. This narrative underscores God's power to restore order and justice, removing all corruption and wickedness to allow for a new beginning for humanity and creation. Spiritual and demonic beings. Theological interpretation. Beyond the physical creatures that populated the earth before the flood, such as the Nephilim, the biblical account and associated traditions raise questions about the existence and fate of spiritual and demonic beings during this period. In Christian theology, there is a clear distinction between physical beings, created to inhabit the material world, and spiritual entities, which include angels, demons, and other non-corporeal beings that operate in the spiritual realm. Demons, in particular, are often understood as fallen angels, led by Lucifer, who rebelled against God. These beings, according to Christian tradition, were expelled from heaven and began to exert malevolent influence over the earth, attempting to corrupt God's creation. The presence of these beings on earth before the flood is a complex theme, and the Bible does not provide explicit details about how the flood affected such spiritual entities. However, the fate of demonic creatures and their exclusion from the plan of salvation is deeply significant within the biblical narrative. Unlike physical creatures who could be saved through the ark, malevolent spiritual entities were not part of the creation that God intended to preserve. The immaterial nature of demons means they could not be destroyed in the same way as physical beings. Instead, the flood can be seen as a symbolic act, representing the purification of the physical world, while the final destiny of demons would be addressed in a broader eschatological context, culminating in the final judgment, as described in the book of Revelation. Ancient Jewish and Christian traditions, including texts like the Book of Enoch, offer glimpses of how these beings were dealt with by God. For instance, Enoch narrates that the fallen angels who mated with the daughters of men and gave rise to the Nephilim were imprisoned in deep abysses, awaiting the day of judgment. This suggests that while the flood purged the physical world of corrupted beings, malevolent spiritual creatures were subjected to a different kind of judgment, separate from the material world. Christian theology teaches that these malevolent entities continue to exist, exerting influence over the world, but their power is limited and they operate only within the boundaries permitted by God. The destruction of the pre-flood world and the exclusion of these creatures from the ark reinforce God's sovereignty over all things, both visible and invisible. This also points to the ongoing struggle between good and evil, which according to Christian doctrine will culminate in God's ultimate victory and the final condemnation of all evil forces at the end of time. This narrative not only emphasizes the importance of purity and obedience to God's will, but also serves as a warning about the consequences of corruption and rebellion, both in the physical and spiritual realm. The flood, therefore, can be seen as a symbolic precursor to the final judgment, where all creation, both physical and spiritual, will ultimately be purified and restored to divine order. The spiritual significance of the exclusion of certain creatures. The exclusion of certain creatures from Noah's Ark is not merely a narrative detail, but carries profound spiritual significance that resonates throughout the Scripture. The flood, as an event of renewal and purification, symbolizes divine judgment against the corruption that had spread across the earth. The decision regarding which creatures were to be preserved and which were to be eliminated reflects a distinction between what was considered pure and part of God's original plan and what had deviated from that plan. The Nephilim and other corrupted beings, as previously discussed, represent more than just physical entities. They symbolize the extent of corruption and rebellion against God. Their exclusion from the ark, therefore, is a symbolic act of rejecting everything that stood in opposition to divine order. It was not merely about saving humanity and the animals that God had created, but about ensuring that the new post-flood creation would be founded on principles of purity and obedience. This act of exclusion also underscores a fundamental theological principle. God, in His justice, does not tolerate corruption and evil. The flood was a manifestation of this justice, where only those aligned with the divine will, such as Noah and the chosen animals, were spared. The narrative emphasizes that salvation is not universal but selective, based on conformity to God's designs. Those who do not fit within this conformity, whether they are humans, mythical creatures, or corrupted spiritual beings, are excluded from the plan of redemption. Moreover, the exclusion of these creatures serves as a continuous reminder of the spiritual battle between good and evil. In the Christian context, this exclusion points to the ongoing process of sanctification that believers must pursue. Just as the ark was a refuge for those considered righteous and pure, the human heart must be a place of refuge for divine values, where everything contrary to God's will is excluded. The spiritual significance of this exclusion can also be understood in light of the new covenant God made with Noah after the flood. This covenant, marked by the rainbow, symbolizes a new era for humanity, where God's grace and mercy are evident, but where divine justice remains intact. The covenant was made with a renewed humanity, free from the corruption that marked the pre-flood era. Similarly, the post-flood creation was restarted without the presence of creatures that symbolized rebellion against God, reflecting the divine desire for a purified world ordered according to His purposes. This event also echoes Christian eschatology, where it is expected that, at the end of time, there will be a final purification, where all of creation will be judged, and only what is holy and aligned with God will be preserved. The exclusion of these creatures in Noah's time can be seen as a prelude to the final judgment, where all elements of corruption will be eradicated and God's new creation will be fully established. Therefore, the exclusion of the creatures from the ark is a powerful symbol of the need to maintain holiness and avoid corruption. It serves as a reminder of divine justice and the importance of living according to God's commandments, so that, like Noah, we may find favor in the eyes of the Lord and be included in His eternal plan of salvation. As we explore the creatures left out of the ark, we encounter profound mysteries and lessons about justice, redemption, and divine power. These events show us that God's plan is as grand as it is precise, with every detail carrying eternal significance. If you are intrigued by these revelations and wish to continue uncovering biblical and spiritual secrets, subscribe to the channel. Join us on this journey of knowledge and faith, and don't forget to check out our other videos to deepen your understanding even further.